It's late 2008 and you are in the market for a budget Intel CPU. But and you found two nice ones, but you can't decide which one you want to buy. Now, which one? A Intel Core 2 Duo e6700 from 2006 that was released 2 years prior for a absolutely eye-watering $315 MSRP, or the recently released in November of 2008 Intel Pentium e5300 that offers similar specs to the e6700 for, well, I couldn't find the original MSRP for this Pentium, but from what I could find, it was something around $115. So which one do you choose? The nice, legendary, and pretty damn great for the time still e6700 that was really expensive at launch and pretty high end, but has gotten down into price and is cheaper now, or the cheaper but newer e5300 Pentium? Well, I decided to benchmark these two against each other just because I was really curious, because they both have things winning for them. For example, the Core 2 Duo has twice the cache of the Pentium, 4 megabytes over the two. But the Pentium has a newer 45 nanometer node instead of 65 nanometer, based on the then new Wolfdale architecture instead of the OG Core 2 Duo Conroe architecture that is 65 nanometers used by the 6700. So, which one do you choose? Which one is better? And I'm here to find out. So let's find out together in the benchmarks. And what will I be running those benchmarks with? I will show you. And also a bit of a disclaimer, I will be mostly running benchmarks on these CPUs. Not too many games, because as you probably have guessed, there aren't that many games that you can still run on these dual cores. So the games that we are going to try to run on these two are BeamNG Drive and Counter-Strike 2. Now, I am not that much of a gamer boy, so I don't have many games in my Steam library. I don't play games that often, I just like to mess with computers mainly, so I'm sorry about that if you don't like that. So it will mainly just be numbers and benchmarks, but in my opinion it is still very interesting, because this one has newer architecture, but this one has better specs on paper with more cache. Also, something I want to mention is the reason why I mainly wanted to benchmark these is because they both run at the same clock speed. Well, pretty much the same clock speed. The Pentium runs at 2.6 gigahertz and the e6700 runs at 2.66 gigahertz. So it has a 60 megahertz, uplift over the Pentium, but I doubt that will barely even give a difference, but we will see. I will benchmark these two CPUs against each other. We'll be running a few games and just generally be seeing what performs better, what is more worth it to buy back in 2008. And to find out, I will be using my retro gaming computer, which has these parts in it that we'll be using. A Asus P5K Pro motherboard, really overkill motherboard for pretty much both of these CPUs. Really nice board. I have been loving this thing. I bought this off a marketplace for only 15 euros with a CPU and RAM. And I bought it because I have quite a lot of SUC 775 CPUs, but that's besides the point. I will be benchmarking these CPUs in this board with 8 gigabytes of DDR2 RAM. Now, I do want to note something about the RAM. 3 of those sticks that you see right there, are all these Kingston modules. Except that module that I just showed you is dead. So we have one outlier here. We have one weird 2 gigabyte full size stick, but yeah, I'm sorry guys, that's the best I could do. We do have 8 gigabytes, but one stick is, mismatched, because I just didn't have any other 2 gigabyte sticks laying around. Keep in mind, this is normally my retro gaming PC. This thing normally doesn't even run a modern operating system. or that intensive games, to be honest. I use this for older stuff. But yeah, that's the RAM. For storage, I will be using two SSDs that you can't see, but you don't have to worry about it. They're both 128GB SanDisk SSDs, one SanDisk X400 with 99% disk health as the boot drive, running a very stripped down, and I mean very stripped down, as debloated as I could get it, Windows 10 install, and a Z400S with 80% health that I have the game stored on. As for power, I will be using this pretty mid Silverstone 400 watt Strider Essential power supply that does have a 80 plus rating. And for the GPU, we will be using this absolutely overkill MSI GTX 660 Ti Twin Thrower Power Edition. This was my first ever proper main graphics card, 2GB of GDDR5. It has like a crazy 19% overclock right out of the box over the normal 660 Ti. So this thing was quite the budget beast back in 2012. I even wrecked the entire DVI port out of it, as you can see. I love this thing. I got every little bit of love out of it, and it still works flawlessly. Never needed new thermal paste. Probably one of the most reliable cards I've ever owned, I've ever used in my entire life, honestly. Great graphics cards, very overkill, but that's basically the test bench that we'll be using to benchmark these two CPUs. So first up, the Intel Pentium e5300. And keep in mind, I will be running these at absolute stock settings. Despite the really powerful and great motherboard, I will not be overclocking these. The only thing that I will be doing is run the RAM at 800 MHz for both CPUs, as the Core 2 Duo has a faster 1066 MHz bus. So, you know, I could cheat and run the RAM at a higher speed, which, you know, I wouldn't even do if that sketchy stick. But that's something to just keep in mind and take note of, that I will be running the RAM at the same 800 MHz speeds for both CPUs and no overclocking. That's all I will do. So yeah, let's get into it. Oh, and finally, before we get started, just in case you're curious, I will be using this beefier Intel stock cooler with a copper block. So we do have some nice cooling and not a flimsy, crappy little single core stock cooler with a crappy aluminum heatsink. This is quite a nice one with a aluminum block, copper block, just to take note of that. This is a pretty good one. Now, first of all, I apologize for the bad viewing angles, but you guys can at least see the usage of the stuff and how it's doing. Well, here we are in BeamNG Drive in GridMap v2, and we are going to try to load a different map soon, but I don't think it's going to go well, because as you can see, yeah, we are suffering here with the CPU usage. Also, I don't think the GPU should get that hot. I don't know what's up with the GPU. I mean, it is quite warm in here, but the 660 Ti that I have usually doesn't go to 70 degrees. That's a bit weird. Kind of concerning. But anyways, we are having 80 FPS at the moment. I have a more lighter car spawns right now. The graphics are on their absolute lowest. Apart from that, I've turned on the shadows to partial, because otherwise it would just look absolutely horrendous, and, well, it still does. Despite that it looks pretty okay right now, it is actually really unplayable, because load times are atrocious. Load times are a main thing that are just so much slower on this CPU compared to like an older quad core or something. Like, if you take a second gen i5 or something, like a 2500, 2400, 2300, it would be miles ahead of this, just because of the 4 physical cores and just the newer architecture and stuff. Like, that's one of the main things I've been noticing while using this PC. For example, if I pause the game and I choose map to show the map, and I go back, look, it takes a little while to load in the tachometer and the start and stop button. That's something that can be really frustrating and infuriating, especially if you have to do that all of the damn time. CPU usage is all over the place, and so is FPS, because the CPU is just getting bottlenecked really heavily by this graphics card. For some reason, the 1% and 0.1% lows that I have right here are not showing up. I don't know why that is, but I'm sorry about that. But honestly, negativity aside, it could have been worse. This could have been worse. You can play basic BeamNG on this. I just really wouldn't want to do it because the frame time, I have the frame times showing right here, but the frame time graph would be all over the place. I couldn't get it to show in MSI Afterburner, but it would just be all over the place. No consistent FPS. Like currently we're hovering around 48. Now then it's 50, and you know, CPU spiked to 100 there. It's not great. Same goes for the GPU. I have no idea what this 660 Ti is doing. If you paid close attention, the GPU was at, look, GPU temperature is all over the place. It was at 71 degrees a while ago. Meanwhile, the usage wasn't that high, and now the usage of the GPU drops again, and the temperature goes down. This is not great. I wouldn't recommend playing BeamNG on this. Though if this is all you have, if you for some reason have a 660 Ti with an e5300, well, you know, you could probably achieve this with a worse GPU, to be honest. You pretty much no doubt could. If you had a 650 or something equivalent to that, you would have very similar frames per second to this. Because if you look at the VRAM usage, it's not even hitting a 1 gig. So if you have a weaker 1 gig card, a card that's weaker than the 660 Ti that I'm using just for benchmarking purposes, you would see similar FPS to this. But even going in the wild, this is still 50 FPS, which is really odd considering when I showed you this at the beginning, we were having like 75 FPS. If I go to our spawn point, it tanks again. Now we have 60 FPS and 65. No, 70. Look at that. 74, 76, 78. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And that's the problem with this. That's the real problem with this. The inconsistency is just undoable. It's really bad. And I do not recommend playing BeamNG on this. And especially not if you're one of those persons who wants to load in obstacles and multiple cars. If you spawn in more than one car, this will absolutely suffer. Let me tell you. So yeah, BeamNG on this is not great. FPS is all over the place, so it will be hard to judge whether the Core 2 Duo will be much better than this. And that's another problem. Can you even see the FPS? Alright, so now you guys should be able to properly see the FPS. Plus I also added a graph for the FPS, so you can kind of see in the graph right there that it's all over the damn place, and it's just not great. Well, despite that the CPU is pretty much packed at 100% almost all the time, we are below 60 degrees Celsius, which is pretty great. Though I'm still slightly concerned about what the GPU was doing earlier. That is not normal. I've never seen this CPU hit 70 degrees. While just gaming. Maybe if you hit it really hard with Furmark, with that old thermal paste that it has, maybe you'll be able to hit 70 with it. But the cooler is really beefy, so I don't know, it's kind of concerning. It's also running on PCIe 2.0 speed instead of 3, so it's not even running at max. So yeah, that's a bit odd. But other than that, BeamNG, although I wouldn't want to play this with this hardware, it is okay. It is something you can do. I'm not saying go ahead and do it. You absolutely shouldn't. But you can. You definitely can. It will just be pretty atrocious. So we're gonna try to load in a heavier map now. And you guys will be able to see in pretty much real time. I will skip through the most of the loading. I will do a light-ish map. Let's try Utah. Look, it's already really struggling to load any of this. Let's do the standard thing. Look, it even struggles to to load the image. Yeah, I will show you once it starts loading in. It even gives a message here that we shouldn't run this on a dual core, but we ignore that, guys. That's peak. Only gamers that game with 2 cores are peak gamers, you know. Now, I again want to apologize if the 0.1% lows and 1% lows aren't showing. Look, this is how long it takes to load in. You get to experience it. It actually uses more than a gig of VRAM right now. I don't know why that is, but I've tried to compensate by adding a frame rate graph so you can kind of see the inconsistency of this CPU. But look at that. If I was on my main computer, right, this would have been long loaded in already. Which, by the way, if you're wondering, has a i5-2600 KF, which is a million times more powerful than this. But yeah, loading times with the CPU are not good. You will definitely need to have a lot of patience, and I bet it's the same with the Core 2 Duo, but I do bet that some programs might load a little bit quicker on the Core 2 Duo compared to this because of the extra cache. I feel like the extra cache will add more benefit to that CPU than, the older architecture and less good efficiency because of the 65 nanometer node will hold it back. So yeah, we're still loading in here. So I've been waiting here for a little bit and things haven't really changed. It is still really unusable, and I'm not even going to try to spawn a lighter weight car because the results judge for themselves, honestly. Pretty sure this judges for itself. 17 FPS, this is unusable, like genuinely just unusable. We are thankfully not seeing the weird temperature spikes on the GPU anymore. I'm glad I caught that on camera. But yeah, this is lowest settings with shadows on. That's it. Now my friend did run this earlier with simplified collision physics turned on, which basically makes BeamNG's purpose nothing, because then the beautiful physics aren't there anymore. But according to him, it did add a lot of a lot of FPS. But I wouldn't play BeamNG like that at all. I wouldn't want to play BeamNG like that. I'd rather just play something else then. So that's not how we're doing it. I don't see any shadows, honestly, despite that I've set them to partial. I do want to drive to the tunnel, because the tunnel always gives a huge FPS boost. Ooh! 20! It's finally starting to load in. See, that's the thing. You can play BeamNG on this, and I'm not going to stop you from doing that, from purchasing an e5300 and a P5K Pro, just to play BeamNG on a CPU that just can't do it. But look, this tunnel normally has massive FPS gains, because you're in a really small environment, basically. But now it's still at 20 FPS, and look, the CPU usage has even gone down. So the CPU is done loading everything in, and things haven't gotten any better, as you can clearly see. So yeah, BeamNG on this is pretty much a no-go, unless you want to install one of those performance mods that turns down the graphics even more, which I used to run back when I had a laptop that had a GPU that just couldn't run this game at all. But yeah, 25 FPS, still in the tunnel. This is not great. I think we will have a very similar result on the Core 2 Duo. I don't even think we're going to have that much of a improvement over that, honestly. It will mainly just be benchmarks. Look, even if we collide with something, it drops even more, even though the CPU usage doesn't even go up when we crash. Let's do another crash. Yeah, the CPU is so bottlenecked it doesn't even use itself to its max potential anymore. So yeah, BeamNG on this a no-go. We are hitting over 30 FPS now, actually. See, that's the thing. These are really hard to compare because the frame rate is so inconsistent and so bad that it's just kind of impossible. I'm really sorry for you guys, but the differences will mainly be judged by benchmark numbers than the game, because it's atrocious. The frame rate is so inconsistent that it just doesn't make sense to compare these CPUs with this game, and that's exactly the reason why I'll be running much more games on much more benchmarks on these CPUs than actual games. So yeah, that basically concludes it for BeamNG on the E5300. Also, I wanted to run Counter-Strike 2, but Counter-Strike just gave me an error message that the CPU has to support SSD 4.2, which this CPU doesn't support. Neither does the Core 2 Duo, so that's kind of sad. So, yeah, I guess we only have a BeamNG test in terms of games then. We could try to run Roblox, but I haven't had much luck with Roblox recently. It just doesn't want to launch, so I'm really sorry about that. It doesn't want to launch, and I've had this at my friend's house, and I've had this here. It's a Roblox server issue, from what I can tell. It's definitely not something to do with my internet connection or my computer. But basically, what it does is, if I go to Task Manager, um, it does attempt to load. We can end Steam now. We're not gonna run any more Steam. It does attempt to load. Well, yeah, look, Roblox Game Client. It's taking up CPU, as you can see. Like, it's taking up CPU, but it's not actually doing anything. It's running in the background, but it's not showing me its GUI or something like that. I can try to go on Firefox and try to run Roblox from there. But yeah, honestly, in terms of Roblox performance, I did try this just a little bit, but yeah, it wasn't great either. I've launched the game, but it probably won't run. Basically, as a CPU benchmark game for Roblox, I run Speedrun 4 because it's an incredibly light game, and with the graphics set to max, it was pretty much able to play it flawlessly, which is pretty incredible, honestly, in terms of Roblox optimization. I mean, Roblox can run on a GTX 650 with the graphics set to max. So, it's not that big of a surprise that it was that smooth for the GPU, but in terms of the CPU, I was pretty surprised. So, yeah, it doesn't want to run Roblox, as you can see, so I'm sorry about that. So I guess the only game we will be running on the e6700 is going to be BeamNG as well. I can't do anything about that. Sorry about that, but yeah, you saw BeamNG and it was really bad. It ran horribly. Roblox doesn't want to launch, but that's just a Roblox issue. But I can assure you, it will play most Roblox games at 60 FPS in 1080p or 1050p, as this monitor is with the graphics set to max. But I'm pretty sure that if you play Arsenal or something, it will start to suffer on higher graphical settings. But overall, it's pretty incredible that you can still play Roblox on a CPU like this that is really old and really underpowered today. But yeah, that basically concludes it for games on the e5300. So let's move on to the benchmarks. Alright guys, I have the benchmark scores saved on my phone from the e5300. As you can see, in Cinebench R20 it did 285 points, which, well, isn't good, as you can see. It's about half as powerful as an i5 5300U, which is a way newer Broadwell based mobile Core i5 with 2 cores, 4 threads, 2.9 GHz, if you're wondering. So yeah, not great, but it's kind of what I expected. At least it's better than my Toshiba Satellite L500, which had this CPU in it, a Pentium T4400, 2.2 GHz, which only scored 64 points on R20. Yeah, that thing was horrendous. Moving on, we have Cinebench R10, which is, much more area appropriate, which scored 5707 in multi-core and 3034 in single core. Now, I used to run this benchmarking app a lot on a Athlon X2 that I used to overclock, but I don't remember the scores of that, so we can't really compare and get a baseline of this. But I'm pretty sure the Pentium is on par with that, if not a bit better, because Intel was dominating at the time. Moving on, we have Geekbench 6, which did run. It didn't complain about instructions like we had earlier, CPU instructions like we had earlier with Counter-Strike 2. 321 for single, 531 for multi. We'll see how that stacks up against the Core 2 Duo. But yeah, another thing I wanted to mention before we move on is that I did get Roblox to run in the end. I did get to run Speedrun 4 for a little bit. It took ages to load. I don't know what's going on with Roblox. I tried running Arsenal, but it just wouldn't start. Like, the game just wouldn't start. But Speedrun 4 with the graphics set to max, pretty much perfectly playable apart from some random hitches from the CPU bottlenecking the system. So I also wouldn't recommend playing Roblox on there, but again, just like BeamNG, you can do it if it's all you have. So that basically concludes the Pentium e5300. Next up, the Core 2 Duo e6700.
Alright, it's the next day, here we are again, on BeamNG, this time with a different car and a different CPU, with the e6700, and honestly I'm not noticing a difference at all compared to the Pentium, although we aren't seeing those weird little spikes that we saw earlier with the Pentium. Well, actually we are, but the frame graph is a little bit better than on the Pentium. Also, I've already noticed a couple times where the extra cache has made a little bit of a loading improvement compared to the Pentium. It definitely feels a little bit smoother in terms of daily tasks and a little bit less stuttery, but other than that, I haven't really felt a difference on the desktop and just generally doing things. So, yeah. Again, BeamNG is really unplayable. We are currently averaging 20 FPS due to the CPU bottleneck, but as you saw earlier, when I had my card just spawned sitting there, we are having around 50. So yeah, even though the CPU isn't pegged, it is being bottlenecked very heavily. And for those key night views, you can see that the CPU temperature is also quite a bit higher than the Pentium, but this isn't to blame on the more inefficient 65 nanometer architecture or this just being a Core 2 Duo. That's because the Core 2 Duo just has a lot less thermal paste on the chip than the Pentium. The Pentium has a proper application, whereas this Core 2 Duo, I just pulled it out of a system, cleaned up the thermal paste, took it home, and just throw it in a system. So the only thermal paste between the chip and the cooler is the thermal paste that was already on the cooler from sitting on different CPUs. So yeah, for a CPU that pretty much has no thermal paste, attempts are really good, honestly. Though it is heating my room quite a bit, so that kind of sucks. But yeah, 18 FPS. I don't even think I'm gonna attempt to load Utah, cause well, that's only gonna heat up my room even more and have the CPU pegged and pretty much do nothing, and it will run just as bad as a Pentium. Honestly, I feel like this runs a little bit worse than a Pentium, and that may be because of the architecture. I'm not sure, but it doesn't. Yeah, I don't know. It feels worse. It kind of feels a little bit worse than a Pentium, despite that the CPU isn't the CPU usage is actually lower than on the Pentium, from what I can tell. So yeah, that's a bit odd. One thing I do want to mention, instead of running opening Utah, the different map, is I did run Arsenal on this from Roblox. I did manage to get that to work this morning, and it wasn't great. I wouldn't recommend you playing any shooters on this, like Roblox shooters, because with the graphics at the max, which this GPU can easily handle, it ran horrible. The CPU could keep up in some Roblox games, I bet, but in Arsenal, there are just too many lag spikes. There are way too many hitches to even call it competitive. So, yeah, Arsenal on this is a no-go, which kind of sucks. 'Cause it's kind of a fun game, despite that there are always hackers in there, or just people that are way too stupidly good compared to others. But that doesn't ruin the fun. But yeah, that basically concludes BeamNG on the Core 2 Duo e6700s. I prefer the Pentium over this. I don't know why, but this just feels worse to me. It just feels worse. 18 FPS. Let's crash our car. Oh my god, I cannot even crash our car. Stupidly slow type LS COVID. You can barely even see the windows. That's how awful the graphics are. Again, same settings, absolute lowest, except the shadows are on partial. But again, I haven't really seen any shadows, so yeah. There you go. There you go. Maybe if you look up in the sky, it may get better. That's the thing. Even when you look down or something, the FPS barely goes up. Oh, there you go. It just struggles. If you do anything like moving, it tanks. Like, look, 25, 24, it's dropping all the way just from moving a little bit. So that's the thing. Yeah, BeamNG on this, I wouldn't want to play it. That's the simple verdict. Let's move on to the benchmarks.
Alright guys, and these are those benchmark results from the Intel Core 2 Duo e6700. So in Cinebench R20 we reached 276 points, which is interesting because the Pentium did 285. Same goes for Geekbench. The Pentium scored 321 at 531 for the single core. But the Core 2 Duo hit 308 for the single core and 524 for the multi-core. The Pentium hit 3034 points for single core in Cinebench R10 and 5707 for the multi-core. And the Core 2 Duo hit 3006 single core points for Cinebench R10 and 5670 points for multi-core in Cinebench R10. So there you have it. This video took me so long to make, but here we are with the conclusion. Which CPU is better? Surprisingly, it is the Pentium e5300, which is this one right here. They're both covered in old used thermal paste, but that's beside the point. So yeah, the 45 nanometer Wolfdale architecture does prove itself to be a noticeable improvement over the 65 nanometer in the Core 2 Duo, and does prove that the architecture did more to CPU performance than the extra twice the cache on the Core 2 Duo, which is surprising to me, because I did expect these to perform about the same, but I thought the Core 2 Duo would have a slight edge in multi-core, or just at least one of the benchmarks that I ran on it, one of the benchmark apps. But nope, the Pentium takes the lead here. So, if you wanted to buy a CPU back in late 2008, maybe early 2009, and you would have been picking between these two, go with the Pentium. Especially if you have a motherboard that can overclock. But if you already were on an e6700, you wouldn't have to be jealous about the newer Pentium dual cores performance with its faster architecture. Especially not if you had a nice motherboard like me with the P5K Pro. A motherboard that can overclock really well, so then you wouldn't really have to worry about it that much, and you could easily surpass the Pentium with an overclock, I bet. But still, if you wanted to buy one of these and you want to get the best bang for your buck, the Pentium was also probably better value, because again, I wasn't able to find an MSRP, though I think I saw somewhere between $115. But I was wrong about the price of the e6700, which I don't know how, because I got that information from Tech Power Up, that it cost us 315 euros when it came out, but I guess it didn't, because I watched a YouTube video about Core 2 Duos, and apparently this thing was over that, over 300 euros. So yeah, the e6700 was bloody damn expensive. Again, I don't know about the Pentium, but it was one of the best in its class. In fact, I think this was the highest end Core 2 Duo Intel released back in late 06 when these came on the market. They only later made an even better model, which was the e6850, which is 3 GHz with, I think, an even faster bus speed. I don't know, but it's faster clock speed than an e6700. So this is technically one of the fastest OGs, very early Core 2 Duos. So yeah, you also got to give it credit for that. This is 2 years older, but it's almost the same as the Pentium. Meanwhile, the Pentium is 20 nanometers less on the architecture node. So, but yeah, that basically concludes it. This took me 3 days to make, but it was definitely worth it. It was pretty cool. I am wanting to do some overclocking projects with that P5K Pro motherboard, because I do have quite a lot of Socket 775 CPUs still lying around still. But yeah, that basically concludes this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and thank you so much if you made it till this end. I really appreciate that, especially with a video that took so much work as this one. Have a good day, and see y'all in the next video.